Bonjour et bienvenue! Hello and welcome. I'm David, your long curly haired host of Auspol Explained, where I explain how the Australian political system works and what's more important to politics than voting. There are many different ways to elect parliamentarians. In Australia, we use a system called preferential voting, which is also known as instant runoff voting. Before we used that, we had what the UK and US use, as well as many other countries, which is first past the post. So how are they different? And how do those different systems change who ends up getting elected? And is one better than the other? Well, I'll let you decide, but first, here is a basic breakdown of the two systems. First past the post is pretty simple. You get a list of candidates and you vote for one person. Done. The votes are counted and whoever gets the most votes wins. It sounds simple because it is. There is no need to get a majority, it's just more than anyone else. Preferential voting, however, is where you rank the list of candidates numerically from most preferred to least preferred, hence the name. The candidate you put the number 1 on is your first preference. The key difference between these two systems is how the most popular person is determined. So in Australia, to win a seat in the House of Representatives and most state and territory lower houses, you need to get more than 50% of the vote. Sometimes more than half of voters put someone as their first preference and they win. Ta-da! Don't have to do any further counting. But if no one gets more than half, well, then the least popular candidate is eliminated and their preferences are counted and distributed. This is repeated until someone gets a majority. This way, the candidate that wins can demonstrate they appeal to the most voters. So how does this change who gets elected and why? Under first past the post, a candidate doesn't need to get more than half the vote. They just need to get more than anyone else. So let's put this into context. Let's use the power of imagination to imagine a very simple election of only 3 candidates: Steve, Bob, and Hogarth the Devourer of the Sun. Steve and Bob both get 30% each of the votes, while Hogarth the Devourer of the Sun gets 40%. Hogarth the Devourer of the Sun wins and banishes Steve and Bob from Parliament to a realm of darkness. But 60% of voters didn't vote for Hogarth. A majority of voters didn't want Hogarth as their representative and prefer if the Sun was not devoured. But he got more votes overall than either of those two pro-sunlight candidates. This is what's called vote splitting. If Steve and Bob are both on the same side of the political spectrum, voters have a choice of one or the other. If one of them didn't run, the other would get about 60% of the vote. But Bob and Steve both have a right to run. Neither of them has any greater claim to it until those votes are counted. So as a result, the two are competing for the same pool of votes. Hogarth, on the other hand, has no competition on his side of the political spectrum because he's eaten his opponents, so gets all the support from that side of politics and can transform into his final form. This problem magnifies the more candidates there are because the vote gets split several, if not a dozen different ways, and people can win with less than 30% of the vote. You don't need to get most people to vote for you, you just need to get first place. And if everyone else just gets between 5 and 10%, well, 20% puts you in first place. But does this really have a big impact? Well, the answer is yes, massively, huge. A great example of how vote splitting can drastically alter the outcome of an election is the recent 2024 UK general election. Labour won a whopping 411 seats, a gain of 211, while the Conservative Party won only 121. That was a massive loss of 251 seats. The thing is, Labour didn't have a big swing. In fact, their support only grew by 1.6%. The Conservatives, on the other hand, lost votes to Reform UK. Reform UK split the Conservative vote, taking the Conservative Party into second place in a race against Labour. Reform UK, on the other hand, only won 5 seats, but it cost the Conservatives significantly more. Because of this, first past the post encourages what's called tactical voting. If you don't like a popular candidate, well, the best bet to defeat them is to vote for another popular candidate with a better chance of winning, even if that's not the person you'd actually like to vote for. So to defeat Hogarth, a lot of Steve supporters will have to just bite the bullet and vote for Bob instead because they think he has a better chance of winning. Preferential voting was introduced in Australia in 1918 to prevent vote splitting. The Nationalists and Country Party were both Conservative parties, but if they directly competed against each other in the same seats, then they risked splitting the vote and losing to Labor. The solution? Preferential voting, which in most circumstances avoids vote splitting. Understandably, Labor at the time did not like this idea, which led to Albert Gardner, a Labor senator for New South Wales, to protest the bill by speaking for a record-breaking 12 hours and 40 minutes through the night, going into every single detail and clause. Effectively, he was trying to filibuster. Understandably, a bunch of senators did not like to experience 12-hour-long speeches, so the very next year the Senate altered its standing orders to put time limits on speeches. So filibustering is not a thing that happens in Australia's parliament. As I literally just pointed out, he was unsuccessful and the bill passed. So how does preferential voting avoid vote splitting? Preferential voting means your vote can't be wasted, because if no candidate gets a majority outright, then preferences are counted, ensuring that your vote, no matter who it is for, is still counted. Even if that candidate isn't the most likely to win, you can still preference them first, knowing that you'll contribute to who eventually does actually win. So once again everyone, thinking caps on, and let's imagine yet another oversimplified election. This time with the Triangles Party, the Wooden Furniture Party, and the Potato Party. The Triangles and Wooden Furniture Party are on opposite sides of the spectrum. One is left-wing and the other one is right-wing. You know which one is which. They both get 45% of the vote on first preferences. Neither is a clear winner, so we need to count the preferences of the 10% of the vote that went to the Potato Party. If most Potato Party voters put the Triangles Party second, then those preferences flow to them and they win. Let's imagine at the next election, the Potato Party campaigns heavily and doubles their votes. They get 20% of the vote, reducing the Triangle Party vote to only 35%. The Wooden Furniture Party still gets 45%, their voter base has not changed, but under first past the post, the Wooden Furniture Party benefits from vote splitting and wins, despite once again a majority of the electorate not voting for them. However, under preferential voting, if most potato voters once again preference the Triangles over the Wooden Furniture, that means that after preferences are counted, the Triangles win again. Of course, if one candidate gets more than 50% of the first preference votes, then it doesn't matter if the vote for the competition was split or not. Even if there were only two candidates, the results would have been the same as to who won. So multiple candidates aren't spoilers, they're just candidates. Everyone has the right to run, and you have the right to vote for who you like. This means the competition can grow without spoiling the results. Voters can honestly express their intentions and opinions about who they want to represent them without fear that their vote will undermine their second favourite candidate. We can demonstrate this with a real-world example instead of bringing in silly party names. We can look at the division of Ryan in Queensland. In 2022, the Liberal National Party got the most first preferences, with 38.50%. However, the second most popular candidate on first preferences was a Greens member, with 30.21% of the votes. Preferences needed to be counted. Over 83% of Labor voters in that seat preferred Greens over the LNP, and that contributed to the Greens winning the seat. Under first past the post, the Liberal National Party would have won that seat because of the split between Greens and Labor voters, and both would have been in a minority. But under preferential voting, the two groups aren't in competition. They decide together as a majority who they prefer to win. Labor voters could have preferenced the LNP instead and rewarded them with a seat. And we see this work in every direction. Labor gains seats every election because Greens voters decide to preference them. Voters from Conservative parties like Katter's Australia Party, the United Australia Party and One Nation mostly preference the Liberals and Nationals over Labor. That way, people all over the political spectrum still get to contribute as to who they would like to be in Parliament, even if their number one pick doesn't get in. But sometimes they do. Preferential voting empowers voters to not have to think about strategy, but honesty. Is the person you want to vote for likely to win? Doesn't matter. Your vote can still be counted and contribute to determining the winner. It provides for a more nuanced result that better reflects the actual wishes and opinions of the electorate. Who gets elected isn't just based off the electoral system, of course, but the political culture as well. While the vote-splitting issue of first past the post on paper discourages people of the same side of the political spectrum from competing with each other, there were more than a dozen political parties in the UK elected in the 2024 general election, plus independents, despite the challenges that first past the post presents. In the US, however, a combination of first past the post, that cultural idea of voting for a third option is a waste of time, and of course gerrymandering, have led to a two-party system dominating politics, with 98% of seats being held by either Republicans or Democrats. Many Americans believe you should not vote for a third party or independent because it's a waste of time. They're very much fed that idea that vote splitting is perhaps the most terrible thing that you could do when it's only there to benefit your opposition. This is something that even under first past the post, the UK proves is false. If people are motivated enough to make it worthwhile, voting for a third option is worthwhile. On the other side of the political spectrum, the Isle of Man's lower house has 24 seats and 21 of them are independents, which is pretty standard for the island. Political parties don't do well on the Isle of Man. While the method of voting does have an impact on who wins, because it changes the way we count the results, the fundamental thing that determines who represents us in Parliament is who we vote for. So consider that when you go to the polls. Just think about who you want to vote for and vote for them. That's the best advice that I have. Pick the person that you want to vote for and then vote for them. That's how elections work and how they should work. But it's not just preferential voting that makes up Australia's electoral system. In any election, there are plenty of votes that go to political parties that don't win any or only a few seats. So how does a diverse range of views and voters get representation effectively? The answer: proportional representation, which I'll explain in part 2 of my series of comparing the electoral system of Australia with other countries. Subscribe so you will be notified when that episode comes out. In the meantime, thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you had a fantastic time learning about different electoral systems. I know I did, because I'm a big nerd. Give me a like, give me a comment, give me words of affirmation, or just, words. Answer me this. What is the latest book that you've read and do you recommend it? And of course, thank you so much to my supporters on Patreon who give me a little bit of money so that I can also buy books. I have so many political biographies behind me all the time, thanks to your support on Patreon. Anyway, I'll see you next time.